friends, thank you for being here today. So I am going to be doing my February reading wrap up. I read a bunch of romance books and I'm going to just give my rating and a quick summary of each, plus briefly my thoughts as well. The first book that I read was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. So this is about two boys, Alex, who is the son of the President of the United States, and that's him there, and then Henry, who is the Prince of Wales. And basically they've always been rivals growing up, but after an embarrassing sort of scuffle happens between them at a wedding, they are forced to pretend to be best friends for the media, but there are real feelings that are growing between them that they have to hide from everyone because of how profile they and their families are, and this is basically about them dealing with that. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, probably more like 3.5, but I didn't love it enough to bump it up to 4 for Goodreads. I enjoyed it just fine. It was honestly, it was mostly scenes of these two making love, making out, wanting to make love, or writing these romantic emails back and forth between each other. And that was most of the book. So this was kind of touted to me as enemies to lovers sort of trope, but honestly the enemies portion it really doesn't last long. It's really mostly the secret lovers part, and there's a lot of cussing that everyone's doing from everyone, which just came off to me, it just read as kind of silly and over the top. But there were a lot of fun moments, and for the most part this book is pretty lighthearted. I wouldn't call this hard-hitting necessarily. I got through it pretty fast. I was indifferent to the political plot line. I'm just not very interested in politics myself, so I don't know, I didn't really care that much, wasn't that invested. It was just a fun, sexy romp. I definitely understand why so many people loved this, even though I didn't love it, and I'm glad that I finally read it. It was good. Next, I read Sweet and Bitter Magic by Adrienne Tooley. This came in an Owl Crate box last year. It has very, very pretty purple sprayed edges, which I love. So this is a sapphic enemies to lovers fantasy. We are following a witch named Tamsin, who is this one on this side, and so because of this forbidden act that she committed years before, she is cursed with the inability to feel love and positive emotions in general. And also we're following a girl named Wren, who is this girl on this side, and she is what's called a source, which is a person who carries a wellspring of magic within themselves, but they can't actually do magic themselves. They just carry a lot of magic within them, and this dark magical plague suddenly starts spreading across the land, and Wren's already sick father becomes afflicted by it, and Wren strikes a bargain with Tamsin. If Tamsin will help her catch the dark witch who created the plague to save her father, then as payment she will give Tamsin her love for her father. Basically, the only way that Tamsin can feel any happiness or positive emotion is by siphoning love from other people given willingly, to almost get a dopamine high, basically. So the two go on a journey to the Witchlands to try and end this plague, and they start to have feelings for one another. This was a very quick, simple witchy story. I rated this 4 out of 5 stars, maybe more like 3.5, but I am rounding up to 4 because it just left me, with a nice positive overall feeling. The magic has a basic set of rules, but it's pretty hand-wavy, kind of like how Harry Potter is. Basically a witch can say a spell or wave their hand and a thing happens, like levitating or something appearing, things like that. And there were some info dump portions that weren't super immersive, but there was a lot of good stuff about sisterly relationships, about assuming things about people without really knowing them. And there was a plot twist halfway through that I didn't expect. But you know, neither the plot nor the writing was revolutionary, but I still enjoyed it overall, so bumped it up to a 4. Then I read Made in Korea by Sarah Suk, and apologies to Sarah, the author. I mispronounced her name in my TBR video as Suk, but she kindly provides a little note on the dust jacket in the back that it's pronounced soup with a K, so Sarah Suk. And this is about 2 Korean American high schoolers, Valerie and Wes. And Valerie runs a student business that sells Korean beauty products to her classmates, and Wes transfers to her school for senior year, and he accidentally becomes a direct competitor to Valerie when he starts selling his own products. And they're both trying to raise money for things that are very important to them, and this book is about them both trying to come out on top of the other while finding romance along the way. Being half Korean myself and not having read any books with Korean main characters, I adored this. I loved all the Korean food references. I understood from experience the various dynamics of a Korean household that they have. I love beauty products. There was just a lot for me personally to enjoy here, and both of the characters have flaws. Valerie is pretty standoffish and hostile, and Wes, like on the other side of the spectrum, is overly timid and spineless, to be honest, but I enjoyed them both. Basically, based on reviews, I've read that a lot of people really disliked Valerie. They like hated Valerie, which I do understand, but I think that both of them have goals that are worthwhile, so I was rooting for both of them, and I just personally wasn't bothered by her personality. I didn't dislike her, because it's supposed to be a character flaw of hers. I thought that it ended very believably and realistically, and positively. Like, it was a really nice ending. I really liked that, the romance here isn't earth-shattering. They aren't declaring undying, forever true love for one another. It was very sweet and built up over a school year, and it was great. So I give this 5 out of 5 stars. And then I read, finally, Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. This is about a Chinese-American girl named Rachel who is dating this handsome, wonderful Singaporean guy named Nick. She goes with him on a summer trip to Singapore for his best friend's wedding and to finally meet his relatives and family, and she quickly discovers that Nick comes from an insanely rich family and has to navigate basically everything that comes with that. So I didn't have high hopes for loving this to begin with. If you watch my TBR for this month, for February, you can just see how I wasn't thrilled about reading this, but I still went into it with an open mind, thinking that maybe I would enjoy it more than I thought. But unfortunately, it was actually worse than I expected it to be. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. I understand how people could just, really enjoy this kind of fiction, but I am just not interested in what this book had to offer. So I was expecting and hoping for, some juicy drama, backstabbing and scheming, that sort of thing. But that stuff was barely there. It was there at a few key moments, but most of this was literally just descriptions of extravagant wealth. A lot of name dropping, tons of proper nouns like famous people that I didn't know, luxury brands that I wasn't familiar with, exotic destinations, collector's items, art pieces. Like, the descriptions of things were very well written, but I just didn't care at all. I didn't care. It's a very plot-driven book, so the characters are pretty flat, not super fleshed out, but even then, it doesn't even feel like there's a plot. It doesn't feel like it's building towards anything. It's very slice of life, but in a way that is so ridiculous that it wasn't like I was wishing, reading this and wishing that this was my life. Most everyone involved is snobby and materialistic and just jerks. Not everyone, but most people. And I only really cared about one character named Astrid, and the resolution to her drama also just felt very blah. And I know that this book is supposed to be satirical, and it does, live up to that, but it just wasn't entertaining to me. The big twist at the end was dramatic, but actually, it has nothing to do with all of the family shenanigans that you read about for the first 400 pages. And I mean no disrespect for the people who love this. I know it's a very popular book, but it's just not my thing. I'm all for drama and scheming, but I felt like this book had so little of that. And I am not interested in continuing the series. I'll bet that the movie is pretty good. Based on what I've read, I think that it will translate well onto the big screen, where all of those descriptions can just be, shown to the audience in a visually stunning way, and honestly just be a more entertaining experience than reading the book was. Then I read Wicked Fox by Kat Cho. This is a modern fantasy romance set in Seoul, South Korea, and we are following a girl named Mi-young, who is actually a gumiho, which is a nine-tailed fox who feeds off the energy of men, and one day she ends up saving the life of a human boy named Ji-hoon from an attack by a goblin creature, and in the process loses her fox bead, which is tied to her soul, and unless she gets it back, she will die. And a friendship and romance blooms between the two of them, but Mi-young soon has to make hard choices between choosing her life and Ji-hoon's. I had a bit of a hard time giving a final rating for this one. I would probably give this 3.5 if I could, but I decided to round up to 4 for Goodreads, and that's mainly, kind of a personal thing. I loved, just similarly to Made in Korea, I loved being immersed in Korean culture. There was even more of it in this because obviously it actually takes place in Korea, and just with all of the Korean vocabulary, the differences in social behavior and language towards other people, the different locations and customs, I really felt transported while reading this. It doesn't quite read or feel like the typical American European fiction novels I'm used to reading, and it made me feel excited about being able to relate to this, being half Korean, and it made me want to see my own 할머니 and 할아버지 and talk to them about their life in Korea. I haven't really actively watched any K-dramas. I've only seen them on TV while I'm visiting my grandparents, but from what I've seen and gathered, this book does kind of have the feel of one. It is pretty it is slice of life-y in a way, and if you like K-dramas, you'll probably like this too. I'm not super drawn to the concept of K-dramas myself personally, but in this book there are so many dramatic moments and endings to chapters that just kind of exasperate the confusion and tension between characters, or just kind of drag them on. I also actually didn't particularly care for either of the main characters, Mi-young or Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon, came across as kind of dopey and a slacker, and Mi-young is mean. And of course you learn more about why they are the way they are, and it makes sense. I just wasn't super invested in them or their relationship, honestly. They kept stepping on their own toes or each other's toes, and it was a little annoying that they were always slightly misaligned. And I know some people totally love that, that kind of dynamic, so if that sounds right up your alley, then you'll probably like it. And it sort of contradicts what I was saying, because I loved Made in Korea, and those characters also had sort of similar character flaws, and I'm not really sure what it is about the other one that I liked more than this one in terms of liking the characters, but I was actually most interested in this generational feud that is actually, it's mentioned on the blurb on the dust jacket, and I was really interested in Mi Young's mom, Yenna, and her story, and how, you know, shamans play into things. That stuff was cool. I also really enjoyed, there are random little interlude chapters that basically tell you more about the Gumiho legend and backstory, and that was just really cool to read. I liked those. It was kind of a little break from the main story. The ending was pretty intense. I couldn't put it down once, you know, until the final conflict was resolved, and it was pretty emotional, really, and had quite the interesting cliffhanger ending. I do eventually want to read the sequel. I may not rush out to buy it, but I am curious to see what happens next. I just think I wanted more fantasy elements and action and less angst. So, you know, my 4-star rating on Goodreads over a 3-star is because of how much I just loved the setting and cultural stuff. Plus, the ending was really something else. So yeah, I'm happy that I've now read a couple Korean centered books, and this book especially, that it was actually set in Seoul. So those are all of the romance books that I read for the month. I'm actually also going to tack on 2 other books that aren't romance, but I did finish them in the same month of February, and they're actually both audiobooks. So the first one that I read was Lock Every Door by Riley Sager on audiobook, which was narrated by Dylan Moore. This is a mystery thriller about a girl named Jules who is broke and down on her luck, and she gets a job as an apartment sitter at this swanky building called the Bartholomew in Manhattan. And there are some weird rules that she has to follow. She can't spend any nights away from the apartment, she can't have any visitors, and she isn't supposed to bother any of the other residents who are, you know, basically rich or famous. And she meets another apartment sitter in her building named Ingrid, who sort of hints at the fact that there's something off about the Bartholomew and it's kind of freaking her out. But before Jules can really get to know her, she disappears without warning. So you follow Jules as she digs into the building's history and tries to uncover what happened to Ingrid, as well as to other apartment sitters in the past who have apparently also gone missing. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I think the audiobook was a great way to go. The narrator, Dylan, is a woman, and she put a lot of expression into the dialogue. I think it would have come off a little more flat if I had just been reading the words myself. Jules isn't a super developed protagonist beyond the hardships that she's gone through in her life, which are pretty sad. So I don't know, that's a criticism if you prefer very developed main characters, but I was still rooting for her, of course. And it's a slow burn, with things becoming more and more eyebrow raising as she discovers more things. There were a few twists. Some felt predictable to me, while others were a surprise. I thought that the ending was good. I haven't read a lot of thrillers, so I admit to not having a lot to compare this to, but overall, I did enjoy it. And the last book I read was Burn by Patrick Ness. So this takes place in an alternate reality 1950s where dragons exist in our world and can speak. They keep to themselves mostly, but some dragons interact with humans and work for them. So one dragon named Casimir winds up being hired by the father of a girl named Sarah Dewhurst to work on their farm, and Sarah is part of a prophecy that I actually can't even remember what it was about, but because of that, she's being targeted by an assassin from a cult that worships dragons. So somehow, I don't know if someone updated this page or not when I read it, but I read a blurb for this book that is different from the one that is currently on Goodreads. The one that is on Goodreads right now straight up spoils a huge plot twist that was not included in the blurb that I read for this book. So maybe my expectations going in were different from other people's expectations. Check out the blurb on Amazon for this book if you want to keep it extra spicy versus the Goodreads one. But I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. This was really weird. I do think that the audiobook, again, for me, was the right way to go. I really like the narrator, Jonice Abbott Pratt. She also narrated Legendborn, which was amazing. And she, again, kind of like with the last book, she made this book, I think, much less flat than I think it would have been if I had just read the words myself. None of the characters are really developed or interesting, and I didn't really care about them. There were lots of POVs that had the story going all over the place. It was info dumpy, and there was a lot of talking, a lot of contemplating. So I was just waiting for something interesting to get going. There's a gay relationship, but it was insta-love and shallow and just didn't have enough time to develop convincingly. And the end was just shrug. I don't know, like, it was fine. Like, there were moments that were intriguing and interesting and intense, but overall this was just bizarre and weird, and for me, not in a satisfying way. So if you like weirdness and saying like, WTF is going on, while you're reading, then this might appeal to you. But there is also a very racist and xenophobic villain character throughout the book, just as a warning. I don't know if you really hate reading about characters like that. So these are all of the books that I read, all of the romance books that I read for this month, along with those 2 audiobooks that weren't part of this set specifically. I would say I'm not very surprised at my ratings. A lot of these were about what I expected. Some of, a couple of them worse, a couple of them a little better. But it was fun having a TBR. And I've had a couple of these on my shelf for a long time. Actually, in particular, like Crazy Rich Asians I've had for a long time. I'm glad I finally read it. I'm glad I can finally unhaul it and get it off my shelf. Along with, I'll probably also get rid of Red, White, and Royal Blue. I will not be reading it again. It was fine, but not a favorite, not anything I'll read again. And yeah, I had a really fun time, reading a bunch of romance books during February, and finished 2 audiobooks in 1 month, which is pretty impressive. Actually, so that brings my total of books read for this month to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 books, and that's pretty good, considering I made recently a video about my Owl Crate reading challenge, which I completed, and I was mentioning how it's not realistic to expect me to be able to read, 9, 10 books in 1 month. But this is, this is a pretty good stack, so I'm pretty happy. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you maybe found a couple books that you're interested in, or maybe have an opinion that's, same to me or even different. Let me know down below what you think about this books. No offense to anyone who loves any of the books that I didn't like. They just weren't really my style. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.